that DE, and I'm not, the DEs I worked on personally have not had to make that transition to remote. I don't know if any of our other evaluators have dealt with that particular issue. Perhaps not, Sarah. So we'll see if someone else is thinking, as everyone's thinking through that, if someone has an experience and can post that in the chat. Otherwise, that might be a unique scenario that we haven't come across yet and a transition to remote work. I think I'm going to go to Medi's question, which has had a couple of responses about, based on experience with DE, how long does it take to completely conduct an evaluation, and how do you ensure kind of the quality of data in the midst of the pandemic? Both on the how long does it take, the quick answer is that DE can take as long as it needs to, and so I think that that's something a lot of our DEs are still ongoing and operate throughout the life cycle of the project or the activity that they're working on, and so it's more of an adjustment not of the length of the DE but the nature of the work. I think some of the questions around timeline, though, related to deliverables, how long does it take to prepare certain deliverables, and on data quality, we've touched on in some pieces of our guide around kind of the data collection. I believe that is kind of topic 4 if you look at our guide, and has some thoughts on data quality. And then timelines we addressed a little bit in deliverables and learning products. Chris or Musa, do you have any insights on kind of timelines or on data quality?
Musa, I'll let you go first if you like.
I think I touched largely around that issue. I talked about data quality being addressed from the planning stage, just planning about how do you ensure that you have multiple sources of data so that you are able to triangulate between several sources, and also how you plan the data collection systems so that they do not have loopholes that can be able to invite errors. And then again, also making sure that you continuously train and support those who are involved in data collection, including supporting them remotely with training and mentorship.
I think for me, it's just verify, verify, verify. We were collecting, we continued even during COVID to collect data like at a health facility level in 6 regions around Indonesia, which is a very large area. And we found where previously it would take us a relatively short amount of time to do a site visit, we were now having to do a site visit and then verify with like a follow-up interview. You know, trying to confirm as much as possible what we seem to be seeing virtually. So it really took additional time, like Ria mentioned.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm good. We had another question come in a couple of times and want to circle back on kind of how can someone who's new to M&E cope with the new era of working remotely? This is obviously a question that applies far beyond developmental evaluation, and I think really speaks to what are the skill sets that can make someone effective as an evaluator in a remote environment. I don't know if Jenna or Laura are still on, but I think both of them had some great insights into the evaluator capacities that really make remote work successful. I'll toss it over to one of them or any of our other presenters that have insights.
I'm happy to say a couple words, but I don't know, Jenna, if you're still on, I also would be happy to defer to you.
Go ahead, Laura. I'll chime in if I have anything to add. Okay.
So I think that many of the skills that you need to develop to be a good evaluator or just a good learner in general, which is important for developmental evaluation, are common across virtual and in-person DEs. The ability to learn, to be flexible and adapt, and say, okay, I can't do it the way I thought I would be able to do it. That's a general quality that, you have to be willing to adjust. And that applies both to in-person and remote settings. I'd say in the remote setting, perhaps there's just more of a need to become comfortable with different kinds of technological platforms, and also to ferret out exactly as Jenna was saying before, the virtual water cooler, where is it? How do you gain access? But see, that's the same question as how do you gain access in an in-person setting to those, important conversations that occur on the side. In some respects, you have potentially more access in the virtual world to some of those kinds of conversations that allow you to glean tacit, knowledge and all kinds of understandings that don't usually get explicitly stated. So I would just say that being flexible, being persistent, developing relationships and rapport with a whole wide range of people, all of that has to be done in both kinds of in-person and virtual settings. And then in virtual settings, you just need to explore different platforms and be even more maybe persistent and ingenious about figuring out where things are happening and how they're taking place. Jenna, do you have anything else to add to that?
I would have said that. The only thing I would add is, and I think Michael made this point earlier, is right now we're all developmental evaluators because the context is still changing very rapidly. And so part of working that remote environment again is just what you would do in person, which is checking in and asking, is this evaluation, is what we're doing, is it still useful? Are the questions still relevant? Because things have changed so quickly. And, our work started back in May where a lot was very much unknown. And so you have to find those opportunities to have that conversation to, regardless of if it's formally a DE or some other type of evaluation, creating that rapport and that honest conversation, that's the role of any good evaluator. And it is a bit more challenging, I think, when you're remote versus in person, but it's something as evaluators that we need to do to make sure that we're being useful and we're understanding the context and the needs of our client.
Let me just add to this that those of you who may have been holding out, waiting for this to pass and a return to normal, that's not going to happen. There's not going to be a return to some imagined way things were before. This is the new normal. This is the way things are going to be going forward. Even post-pandemic, whatever that may look like, we're facing the likelihood of global recession. The climate emergency is intensifying. And the folks who study these things say that this pandemic was not the big one. It's yet to come. We're in a world of ongoing turbulence and change and uncertainty. And the traditional models of planning, it's not just evaluation, planning, commissioning studies, the way organizations work, were based upon a kind of military control and command model that we as human beings are in control. We know what's going on. We plan our work, work our plan. What complex dynamic systems tell us is we're not in control, that we're engaged, we're part of the system, it's dynamic, we're in the middle of the chaos as it's unfolding. And so not only evaluation has to adapt, but we are going to be part of the tail wagging the dog in a sense that planning, design, commissioning, budgeting, organizational dynamics are all going to have to change. And part of this is an interactive process, whereas evaluators are learning how to pivot and adapt. We're going to be helping organizations realize that that's their future as well. And so as partners in this, in fact, part of the way developmental evaluation emerged was that social innovators reported that a major barrier to innovation and adaptation were rigid evaluation systems. The evaluation held people back. Having to reach predetermined goals with rigid logic models was actually interfering with adaptability and agility. And so part of this is removing those barriers of evaluation, inhibiting adaptation, and then helping organizations learn that they can be adaptive even as we can be adaptive. So we are in this together, and that is our future together.
Thank you, Michael, Laura, and Jenna for those good insights.
Hey, Sarah, I could just add a point, just going back to the previous discussion on one, data collection, and also just timelines relating to deliverables. I think a big point that came out of this whole process, talking to multiple evaluators, but especially you, Abednego, and the Circle team was, the use of social media. and mobile-based platforms like WhatsApp to use for data collection being a really reliable tool. WhatsApp especially being a tool that's more accessible than I think a lot of people realize, and all over the world. You know, that was before, still now, during, and will be after the pandemic. And you know, making full use of any and all of, you know, Facebook, Twitter, whatever platforms you have accessible to you, take advantage of them to, I mean, not only connect with people, but collect data as well. And also with the timelines for deliverables, a point that Laura mentioned in our interview with her that I think is applicable for everybody is that pre-pandemic, you know, in the past, when you're all in an office together, if there's a deliverable you're all working on, you can pop by someone's desk quickly or office just to say, hey, can we talk about this? Can we run through this question or issue together quickly? And that could, you know, speed up the process and allow for more clarity on the deliverable or parts of it that you're trying to produce. But obviously now in the remote environment, you don't have that ability. And so again, like the main theme that so many people have talked about, you know, iterative, many iterations, higher frequencies of interactions, and informal ones as well, taking advantage of finding out where the virtual water cooler is and using that to connect with people and in all situations, but including on the subject of deliverables too, to get that clarity, to help get that continuity. You know, it's applicable to any remote environment, but especially applicable to DEE as well, which we all are now.
Thanks for circling back on that, Don. We have a couple more questions. We're quite a bit over, but if those who still want their questions answered want to stay on, please feel free. Nancy asked some great questions about kind of the nature of data collection. It's often in data collection processes or an evaluation where the flow of information is one way, and what we can do to be kind of more inclusive, you know, and to circle back to those that are providing information and empowering them in a way that they are, you know, the owners and responsible for their own data and the use of their data. This is another very big question that goes kind of beyond the scope of just developmental evaluation to kind of evaluation and at large. But thoughts on kind of what we can do to kind of invest in the capacity of those that are engaging with us. And I remember one takeaway that we had in remote DE as a potential advantage of remote developmental evaluation is that it can make it easier to close the loop. If all of your data collection, your interactions are virtual, then that excuse of, oh, I'm only there for this week or for this time, and that's when the conversations happen is gone, because you now have that virtual connection that is not limited by physical proximity anymore. And so that's something that a couple of our evaluators have pointed out as being an opportunity in virtual work to think about the next step of that process, not just one-time data collection or taking in, but finding a way to circle back, you know, to ask follow-up questions, to share results, and to make it a much more collaborative process. And thoughts from any of our other evaluators?
So I can speak to this at a certain level. So just in our evaluation, you know, the people we were evaluating were employees of UNICEF. So it's a bit different than going out into communities. So I'll preface by saying that. But in terms of circling back, this goes back to this issue of formality and informality, which is sharing these results back is not waiting for things to be fully baked in the final report. It's not that you go collect the data, analyze it, and you disappear for a few weeks or a month and come back with a really polished, nice report. It doesn't serve the goals of being adaptive in real time. And furthermore, you know, even though it was an evaluation of the organization itself and not community partners, we found that, you know, you do want that input and feedback from anyone that you're evaluating. You know, their voice should be present in the report. And so I think this is something we were talking about prior to COVID and prior to DE, which is how do you really get community feedback into any findings you have as an evaluator in order to validate your findings and have that constituent voice really embedded in anything that you're feeding back. And so what has been a challenge in this remote environment is, I've said and others have said, is it's getting more formal because you're missing out on those informal interactions. And so it's up to you as the evaluator to have people be a little bit more comfortable with informality. That includes meetings, so that also includes draft deliverables or summaries of findings, and getting that feedback from those that have been part of the data collection process throughout, and not waiting until you come back with a final polished report.
Yeah, I would just add to that what the remote environment may provide greater opportunities for is in co-creating those either feedback sessions or the original draft of whatever it is, because you can work together collaboratively on documents and things, which of course you could do pre-pandemic, but in my experience, at least, it was less common to work that way. Sometimes we did, but it's much more. It's actually necessary now in sometimes, and it can help you sort of establish a way of working together that then follows through as you develop different drafts. If it's a product that's going to end up being something formal and public, or just help to inform the work, the interactions, the strategic planning, whatever it is that you're working with people on. And then also I wanted to say that like Jenna, my DE is related to or focusing on USAID agency staff members, mostly in the headquarters in DC. So there's less of an opportunity or need to go further, through different levels out to where USAID works. But we have been doing some of that in the DE, trying to gather information or do surveys, interviews, et cetera, of either USAID staff members outside of the Capitol or eventually participants in USAID programming. But I'll stop there and let others sort of chime in.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you for the inputs on the chat as well, to Scott and to Ashwin for some additional comments on how this can translate in practice, real examples of real-time deliverables to kind of increase engagement, and also using this as an opportunity to kind of really think about our readiness assessment process, to think about kind of how developmental evaluation and how partners are also adapting to these new processes, because it's not just how we change the work we're doing, everyone is changing how they're operating, and we need to be able to adapt to that. I'm going to jump on what Laura said a little bit to a question from Andrew. Sarah, I'll come back to your question on data collection about what do we do to make sure when we're working in a synchronous environment. Laura talked about kind of co-creation being a good opportunity in DE. How do we do that? How do we prepare focus groups and participatory workshops, of things that often are the bread and butter of this type of adaptive, collaborative, co-creative work in a virtual environment? And we heard from, as this is one of the biggest challenges that I think all of our remote DEs faced, is technology fatigue, perhaps a perceived timestamp on how long a meeting can be, that by 2 or 3 hours on a screen, it's really hard to kind of maintain the same level of engagement. And some specific tools. I can open it up for comments, but I do want to wrap us up in the next 5 minutes. So I think I'll say that I know that the Julinde team has done some great work on this. I know that Laura with the digital strategy evaluation has done some great work on, she mentioned earlier, on kind of using Google Slides and different forms of facilitation. But do you have anything that you want to call out right now in a minute or two?
Yeah, I'll just say that when you mentioned making sure or thinking about DE readiness, I wanted to emphasize that it's not going to be appropriate in every instance to conduct a DE in general, no matter whether remote or in person. But that is especially important to kind of follow up on and clarify in the remote context, because there are additional expectations and ways that people have to be prepared to interact and to be filled in on what the expectations are ahead of time in terms of that kind of participation. And it requires real champions on the inside, which is always true of a DE, and actually in general evaluation or whatever kind of learning event that you're doing. You need that, ideally peer level, but also higher ups champions, and they can set the tone, they can clarify things from an insider's perspective about what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it. And yes, you really do need to attend that workshop, and here's how you can do it. But then the only other thing is what I said in the chat, you need to yourself as an evaluator be very clear ahead of time to prepare people if they need an account to participate in a platform that you're using. Make sure that they get that account. Remind them several times. If you think that maybe there's going to be some resistance or they have to do some pre-reads ahead of time, make sure that you make it clear up front, give them a lot of opportunity to do that. Answer questions, meet separately if there's going to be conflict ahead of time. But all of these things are also true in the in-person environment. I just think that they have a slightly different set of considerations in the remote context.
Mhm. Great. Anyone else want to chime in on that? I think I'll turn it to, I have one more question and that will wrap us up right on time, 30 minutes late. So the last question, and it's actually kind of a combo question, is really on data collection. I think Sarah asked a great question that is on all of our minds in a virtual environment about how do we do data collection virtually without just finding the people that are easy to find? And perhaps some of our locally based DEs can speak to that and data collection. And there was another question from Casa related about kind of ensuring ethical issues such as anonymity and confidentiality when virtual. Are either of those challenges that you've addressed? I think I'm looking more directly at our Jolin, Jalinde, and Circle DEs, if you have anything to speak to on the data collection. Though I'll also point you to the guide because I think there's some good additional insights on data collection in there.
I think, like I said, I think one of the most important thing, and which is fundamental to DE, is co-creation. So if even in the process of developing the tools and the research questions, it's important that those beneficiaries and those who particularly work on the front line are engaged in that process. And I think more important is to make sure that even remote data collection or data collection for DE involves those who are in hard to reach areas, by making sure that data collection is decentralized so that there are individuals from those communities that can facilitate either remote data collection through program related digital tools, or can also be able to facilitate in-person collection is not possible.
Great, thank you, Musal. I'm going to close us with that. I included, because the slide's not available right now, just contact information again for Dom, for Chris, and myself. And I think maybe we could post, oh, there we go. Thank you, Laura. I was gonna say, I'm gonna post the link to the guide again, because that has some great additional resources on each of our presenters, with links to case studies and to other resources to the websites for each of the evaluator teams that have spoken today. Thank you everyone for joining. We had 70 or 80 people stay on an additional half an hour for Q&A. So really an impressive group. And I think I appreciated the interesting discussion and thinking not just about this, but about evaluation more broadly, and how we as a community of evaluators that's committed to adaptation, committed to working in complex environments, can adapt to this new global norm, the phrase that we all love to hear. And with one, again, final large thanks to Michael Quinn Patton for hosting us today, to Blue Marble Evaluation. We learned so much from you and from your insights, and we're grateful to have this platform for all of us to come together today. So thank you everyone from all over the world. I'll say farewell from Arlington, Virginia, and from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.